So, Brother Ben, how can we get into esoteric subjects and not get ungrounded?
It's a beautiful question, brother Jamal. Yeah, I mean, grounded is a big word, and I think it's one of those ambiguous words that not a lot of people understand. And my interpretation of being grounded, there's two definitions. One is literally like electrical current. Okay, you're grounded, you're touching the earth, you're circulating energy. It's a more scientific term. Another term is you're in your body. You're, and then another term is that you're realistic. And so for me, it's like we have these five senses, and it's already hard to know what's happening within the realm of five senses. How are we going to expand our awareness to these ambiguous spiritual subjects that are very hard to track, very hard to keep how do you really know what's going on in that regard?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we've done is we've relied on two methods mainly, and that's developing our own clairvoyance and then also working with spiritual cultures that have also developed their clairvoyance, sages, mystics, initiates, people that are a lot more dedicated, witch doctors. And, we almost have to take their word for it. But then it's like, well, how can we trust it? How can we vet it? Because in the traditional educational system, I have to go to school for years and years to get an engineering degree. So I have this level of authority where I'm not just a random dude on the street saying something. And you're like, all right, he has a degree. He's trained his mind to see these complex subject matters very naturally, intuitively. And I'm going to take his word for it when it comes to engineering versus some random dude on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And hold up.
Can't forget the hat.
Hey. So I think that that's like, a lot of people, we talked about, getting into spirituality as a form of, a coping mechanism where they felt distrust in the establishment, distrust in authority, distrust in the scientific community. So they throw it all away. They're like, I don't like the scientific community. I don't like how they do things. I'm going to move towards the spiritual culture, I guess you can call it.
Right.
Random dudes on Instagram often saying stuff that just came to them that morning. And then they spit it in some post or comment sections. And then it accumulatively adds up and makes people's belief systems because the person watching it isn't necessarily being thorough. Again, back to that exact, how do you know what you know, as you've been saying.
Yeah, the epistemology.
So, we wrote off the scientific community because it's like, well, I don't think you need a degree to have your opinion matter. And to a degree, it's very valid. But on another level, it's like when you're dealing with high profile, potentially high risk situations. I mean, when you're talking about your health, when you're talking about your spiritual well being, when you talk about your karma, when you're talking about certain things, those are high risk. Because if you make a mistake, as Omram talks about it, you need to find a guide because look at these mountains, you know, try climbing those mountains in the dark. You might fall, you might die. So it's like he says the spiritual path is very much like a mountain, and there's a lot of terrain that's really hard to navigate. And so there's two options: develop the clairvoyance, which is a long path, which is a path of purity, or start to vet your sources a lot more. Just like you're not going to let some random dude tell you how engineering works, and then you go try to build something in your garage and blow up. The same goes for your spiritual health, your spiritual well-being.
Yeah, there's a lot of valuable perspectives in that. I think another thing that's important is to define esoteric. That's a word that you see a lot of the mainstream kind of health people, like an Andrew Huberman, for instance. He always says like, "Oh, it's not esoteric," like using esoteric as like crazy pseudo mystic kind of stuff. Um, the simplest way to think about the term esoteric is there's two main kinds of knowledge. The first is exoteric. Exoteric knowledge is very easily accessible. It's what is taught in schools. It's what you can easily do a Google search on. Whereas esoteric knowledge is in any particular domain. It's the hidden knowledge only known by the top experts within that field. So that's one element of esoteric. and defining what that is. And also you could define it as knowledge which, in order to obtain, you have to go through significant initiations to obtain it. It's not something you can just easily get, but you have to go through life experiences that then lead you to acquire that particular knowledge. So when it comes to spirituality and esoteric knowledge and things like this, you know, esoteric knowledge, I would say, is the secret to becoming an expert or a master in any particular domain, right? Because if you just study the exoteric things, you're just going to be in the shallow level practitioners, which for most people is fine. But if you are after mastery of becoming an adept in any particular area, then you want to, eventually you'll find yourself in different esoteric subjects. Now, the thing with balancing that with being grounded is, the way I like to see it is like the exoteric knowledge, like the more mainstream kind of science, the more, let's say you're in the health field, like understanding cellular anatomy, things like this, is valuable to the extent that it allows you to adapt to the world and speak to the language of other people. The esoteric knowledge, that's where you can really advance your power, so to speak, and tap into whole different realms where you're on a genius level, like Tesla level, like genius, where you're actually pushing the envelope forward. I think when people get ungrounded is when they haven't properly studied the exoteric, whatever field they're in first, right? So, for instance, I would consider myself an expert in the field of esoteric psychology. Now, if I were to just go headfirst into reading like theosophical books and like all this crazy, very deep esoteric stuff without having any grounds in what's actually taught at universities, I could very easily, first, I put myself in a position where I can't actually communicate effectively at all what the subject matter that I'm learning. But then also, it's like, how do I actually have some kind of grounds of knowing what's real and what's not? You mentioned the term realistic. Realistic means adapting to reality. So I feel like it depends what realities you're talking about, because there's realities that transcend the physical five senses that those on the spiritual path have experienced. And that's something that doesn't fit within the purview of empirical sciences. You know what I'm saying? So I think the notion of balancing it to me is a courage and a willingness to go into the areas that no one else has been. And necessarily you're going to be persecuted for going in those directions, where people are like, yo, why are you talking about XY conspiracy? Why are you challenging an entire body of exoteric knowledge that every other person believes in? So there's a level of courage to go into those spaces. But if it's accompanied with a of resentment towards everyone that can't see and understand your esoteric perspective, then that's where I think it leads into ungroundedness, because that emotional dissonance leads to just wanting to separate from society more and more, until the distance so big that you're not even on the band of reality that other people are operating in.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting because I want to bring up, like, on one side of things, baby steps, but on another side, trusting in the soul. And what I mean by that is, when you start reading people like Carl Jung, that I haven't read a lot, just hearing what you've been talking about it this week, massive importance put on symbolism and dreams.
Hmm.
And so we've dreamt forever. And there's been this existential, this, you're like tapping into these different things all day. And in other cultures, they put a lot of value on that. And so from the jump, they allowed you to kind of get into those spaces of like wondering what's up, what's beyond the surface of 3D reality. But on another side of that, I want to talk about baby steps, where realizing like there is a practicality to life that helps you out when you realize, like, okay, what is really important for today? Is it, and I'm not trying to hate on anyone, but is it important to know, to a degree, it is important to know about conspiracy. It is important to know about spiritual principles that exist on high that affect life on this planet. But then it's like there's more pressing situations. So, what are you doing to ensure that your needs are being met, that your impact on other people is healthy and clean? What are you doing to make sure that, these callings on your heart are getting moved forward, rather than getting lost in the sauce in this very existential imaginative plane, you know?
Mhm.
It's very easy to, start to daydream, especially when the world, again, back to this other side, not the baby steps, but this deep awareness that there's something spiritual going on. When the world cuts that off, we feel almost gaslit, and we feel it's extra important to go into the spiritual gnosis and curiosity and exploration
Mhm.
because we're so pushed down, pushed away from it. We're like, well, obviously it matters. Obviously there's more to life. And so, yeah, like, um, as Omram talks about, he talks about summits and valleys. And valleys in this way has to do with being in the world of the world. Summits has to do with, being above the world.
Yeah, not of
Be-
it, as Jesus says, yeah.
Yeah, being above the influence, above the Maya, the illusion and negative influence, above the games that they're playing that keep you looping. Definitely getting into both in a healthy way, but knowing your windows. If you have a little weekend where maybe you take some mushrooms and go into nature and have this deep soul experience, that's one thing. It's probably going to be very valuable on one level. And then if you did that every day, would that take you away from your daily life being in the valley? Like, again, are you foraging all your own food? Are you like eating honey out of beehives? You're not. So it's like in modern human life, we have these certain needs, and to of neglect them and avoid them, overly emphasizing the esoteric and spiritual concepts, you end up, you know, like we were talking about the other day with that pimp. He's like, if you put a woman above God, you lose both.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, having a physical body, if you get rid of, the physical well-being for spiritual concepts, if you put a woman before God, you lose both. If you put spiritual idealism without earthly practicality and responsibility, what happens when, your nervous system is super unregulated and you can't function like a normal human or animal should function? What happens when you're broke? You're going to be super stressful. You're not going to have resources to manage so well.
Mm.
So it's like the esoteric is very important because there's a logic to understanding we do live on that plane. How do we have mastery on those different planes, law of attraction stuff and whatnot. But then there's also physical laws that we ignore as well.
Yeah, and I think it's healthy to kinda swing hard in the other direction, like, the way I like to see it, not to get all, like, in the spiritual classism, but spiritual awakening is a genuine thing. When you have a certain degree of mystical experience, for a lot of people, psychedelics is their first, like, entry door into that. There's many different entry doors, and we're gonna have more in-depth conversations around psychedelics in the future, but once you have that sort of breakthrough when you realize, wow, there's more to reality than what I was taught, than what meets the eyes, hmm, then it's there's all the different people that have yet to experience that may be in your family, that might be in your immediate circle. You already start to feel ostracized to a degree because now you've experienced a certain degree of gnosis that cannot easily be translated to other people. And I think it's very healthy to be swinging. Hey, and
That's tough.
I think it's very healthy at a certain degree of your own like journey to swing in that other direction of like, wait a second, if this was hidden from me, what else was hidden from me and go in that direction? But like a funny archetype you'll run into in these so-called conscious communities is that the person that will sit you down and tell you about all the craziest, yo, hollow earth, yo, they're doing this, chemtrails, da da da. And you look at the person, they're like in not good health at all. Like you can tell they have no embodiment practices whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it's like, how am I supposed to believe all these crazy things that you're saying? And you're just not grounded and in good health, just on a physical health
You'll
level.
recognize them by the fruit of their labor.
Exactly, so it's like a lot of these people get a lot of respect and are heralded, for doing things that aren't really that impressive, and then it becomes like a
How
bit
much
of a
yeah.
go ahead?
How much time do you spend online? Oh, that's impressive.
Yeah, it's
They're just
like
on the rabbit holes,
chronically online through the rabbit holes, it's like, what's impressive about that? Why are we applauding that? Why is that noteworthy? So I think to me, a big aspect of it is if you have been blessed to go through that experience, a spiritual awakening, which really shouldn't be romanticized because this shit isn't fun all the time. And like, that's a whole other topic. But if you are blessed to go through that experience, then we have a responsibility of application.
Yeah.
If you have access to all these things, I think, and it's okay to not apply it immediately. Like the artist goes into its own cocoon, and it could be many years where from the outside it looks very selfish. Like, yo, what do you do? You're just only in your thing. And they emerge as a butterfly with all these gifts to give. So I think it's natural to go into your own like enclave and like be in hermit mode as you're building something. But the esoteric studies should always be in the direction of application. You know what I mean? I called this in my second book, The Three Human Energies, I call it the reclusive trap, which is when you go through that awakening and you have the hypersensitivity, there's the instinct to think that, oh, if I'm going to go to an ashram and be around all these like-minded people that also have experienced the sensitivity, then and go into reclusive mode, then I'll be able to finally, tap into the creator in a new way and all this kind of stuff. But it's a trap. It's like a Chinese finger trap. I like to give the metaphor because by pulling out from society, you think you're freeing yourself, but you're actually constricting your own growth. And unlike it, paradoxically, your energy needs to go back towards society, back towards all the esoteric subjects you've studied. How are you applying it in the world? And like, I think a great example, we can look at different historical figures like a Steiner. Like the things that Steiner has created in his lifetime, he didn't just study some wild shit, hide, and never produce anything. This man
Yeah.
pioneered an entire new philosophy called anthroposophic medicine, or anthroposophy. Underlying his very first book, it's called The Philosophy of Freedom. He actually outlined a entirely new epistemology. Epistemology of philosophy is theory of knowledge. How do you actually know what you know? He outlined a whole new epistemology that includes the spiritual sciences. No one's done that before in the way that he did it.
Yeah.
He did that as the foundation, and then he built out so much on top of it. He created new forms of architecture, medicine, dance, the Waldorf schooling. That's what he's most well known for. That is excellence. That is what I would like to see more people doing within the so-called conscious spiritual communities. Is like, why are we just playing these status games of who knows the more, the crazier conspiracy games and things?
Say the more,
And
who can assume and claim the more. It's not who knows more,
at this point, it's a status game. When you're just doing that, it's like, I would like to see more application, and there are people doing that. Like, what's that dude who like created the gasoline from
Yeah,
plastic?
that young man in ATO.
Yeah, like that to me is like he clearly went through his own spiritual awakening, awakened to things on the side of.
He was in commit back in the day.
Oh yeah, my man's was deep.
So that's why I think again it's about pull this spectrum. Everything is so spectrum based, And we're talking about mountains and valleys. And I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate to what you said because it's nuanced. Because if Steiner was only chilling in the valleys, you're saying like at least he was out here in the world putting in work. 100% true. But he had to go into his study and his solitude, and he had to energetically cleanse himself. He had to protect himself from psychic pollution.
Right.
He had to embrace the summit as well, aka privacy, aka meditation to get to a high perspective, um, purification. So to be as effective as we want, as effective as, if we want to be really strong in society, we can't be necessarily of the world. Otherwise, we're just back to being, programmed and almost regurgitations of old versions of people that have already came and gone. So to craft ourselves into just more of an effective, clean, empowering avatar, you definitely need to get into solitude, and that's the summit. Again, the summit to see everything 360. It emphasizes like high awareness because again, if you're out in the valleys overly, again, they say it takes about 7 repetitions for you to start to believe something as true. So I could say, Jamal, the sky is blue, or actually that might be true. The sky is red.
Yeah.
And after a few times, especially when it's coming from a few people, the subconscious doesn't argue it the same way. It doesn't say, I don't know if the sky is blue or red. It's going to say, I think it might be red.
Yeah.
So again, if you're overly in the valleys, just the amount of uh, repetitions, the volume of opinions that come at you, the subconscious, again, we don't have the aura and we don't have the intellectual alchemical skills to protect ourselves. And then I wanna switch subjects. So the other day you were talking about physics, chemistry, math, and what was that other one?
Biology.
Biology. And so spiritual people, again, often spiritual people, they write off the 3D. They're like, fuck the 3D, I don't give a fuck. This is like, they very much undervalue it. Forgetting this very famous, I think it's one of the, like, it's definitely one of the hermetic principles, as above, so below. It's like,
Yeah,
well,
law of
who do you
correspondence.
think made this stuff?
Yeah.
Who do you think made an atom work that way? Who do you think made a tree to grow that way? Who do you think made gravity to act in this way? So it's like you have to start to understand there's a sacredness to what you consider mundane, materialistic point of views, because what is reflected on the highest is also reflected on the lowest. So, it's how you look at things. It's not just what you look at. It's like, if you're quick to say that's not valuable because it doesn't trigger my esoteric sensor enough, that's because you're lacking real spiritualized point of view. And that's what Omram says. When we continue to look at things on a material point of view, we lose out. When you can start to make it a spiritual point of view to look at that rock, well, that rock isn't just what it looks like. There's much more reality
Yeah,
to it.
that's what gives perspective. Which, speaking of the valley and the mountain metaphor, another one that a story he's told many times to emphasize this point is it was something along the lines of like, imagine there's a house and someone pulls into the driveway. And there's a scientist, world-renowned Nobel-winning scientist that's inside of the tree or inside of the house, but they can't see the driveway. It's out of their view. And there's like a 7-year-old, and the 7-year-old is able to climb up the tree, and then the scientist can't see. He has to ask, "Hey, like John, like can you see John? Can you see the
Tell me what's
tell me
happening.
what's happening?" Because he has the perspective. So even with all the intellect and everything, if you're not able to rise above, you don't have the perspective. So I think that's a
When
beautiful
things
metaphor,
block your view. Yeah.
you know? And another thing that I want to add to this topic of being grounded in esoteric subjects is the importance of a master, a spirit following a spiritual master. You hear us reference Omram all the time, and the term master, there's some very, very deep reasons to why the Western mind has so much resistance to the notion of the master. Even when I've used that word in the past, people think like slave master. That's the way what they
Or just like
associate.
cult guru.
Yeah, like, and there's a lot of resistance to that's a great subject in the future as well, guru worship and all of that. But a simple way to put it is like with these spiritual realms, we have to become like spiritual scientists, right? And we could say that the whole Aquarian age, if you want to use that term, is asking us not to be in the Piscean, just have faith and be blind faith and just trust and rely on the heart solely. Now we're being asked to become spiritual scientists, to actually practice self verification. You hear these things, but you don't know until you've truly experienced it. That then you can, and when you speak from that, that's a place of wisdom. That's the difference between wisdom and knowledge. I'm mentioning all of this because if you want to excel in any domain, like take spirituality aside, let's say that you want to become the best basketball player. Let's just use that as sports as a metaphor. If you want to become the best, you study the best. You study someone that's way ahead of you, that's performing at an exceptionally high level, and that can teach you so much, right? Same thing in the various different material sciences, right? So we mentioned before the 4 primary material sciences is biology, chemistry, physics, and mathematics, which corresponds to the 4 spiritual sciences. Biology corresponds to magic, chemistry corresponds to alchemy, physics corresponds to astrology, and Kabbalah corresponds to mathematics. Now that's in the system we work with. There's many different systems you can work with. Um, I mention that because if we want to become masters in these other domains, it's like to become a master, you must first submit to one. You must first find someone who's advanced and study their ways with discernment. That doesn't mean in following someone that means that you just believe anything that they say. I think everyone. I'm not here to claim that there's one master for everyone. We could say Jesus was a master. You could say Buddha was. There's many different traditions, but finding some tradition keeps you very, very grounded because these are people that have already traversed the path, the terrain, so to speak, and have a path that doesn't mean that you walk in the exact footsteps or you fall for the unconscious instincts to play the part of the clergy. That's not what we're saying. We're saying maintaining that scientific ethos as you navigate those realms. And that to me is critical with staying grounded in esoteric areas, because if not, then you start to have a God complex where you think, oh, I know I'm the shit. I know all these things that people don't know about. No, you're not. So many people have been way further than you've been. And if you'd like to go further, rather than fall victim to your hubris and your pride, why not learn from a master? That's why we reference Omram all the time, because to us, he's the greatest. He's the GOAT in what we want to study and become masters in these esoteric fields. Now, he's not going to be the GOAT for everyone, and we're not trying to convince people that it is.
Objectively the GOAT.
That's for another day. But yeah, so that to me is another critical facet.
Well, I mean,
You know,
I'm going to be an Olympic athlete. Do I just go train myself? If I'm going to be a UFC champion, do I train myself in my garage? Like, there's obviously like huge blind spots. There's like ways to train that you're like, damn, I didn't even know you can train that way. I didn't even know that this was a potential scenario that I could run into. And then I compete against someone who has a trainer who does know all those nuances, and they wipe me out. So it's like sports and coaching, getting a degree again. Like I said, like, am I going to ask like a 19-year-old kid to build, to be a civil engineer and build a city? Or do I need someone who's been initiated into these concepts to understand that there's challenges that they're supposed to use their brain to overcome, to understand those nuances and to perform well in those areas? We understand that with real world stuff. So when it comes to spirituality, it's all fine and dandy. Everything's valid, which is one of the new age spells, man. Everything's valid. Personal truth is objective truth, which
oh,
just is not true, man. It's like, why why are you still suffering? Why are you still unhappy? Why can't you keep certain relationships? Why do you still mistreat people? Why can't you attract abundance? Those are very niche areas. And those niche areas require certain factors to be mastered, or at least kept under your awareness and mitigated, curated, so an like opportune results happen. It's not just, hey, I want to be good in this area and therefore I am. You're not valid in that level, especially in the 3D where massive amounts of force is acting upon you and you're supposed to overcome these things. So again, the same way that people go to become professors have to study a certain amount, in spirituality, that's what we were saying at the start. You got two options: develop clairvoyance, and that's a long-term path, or start studying under a master, and then hopefully also develop a level of clairvoyance.
that will assist in
Yeah.
and that's the thing, is that's the fastest path, really. Like if you try to do everything yourself in just complete, like angst of I'm not going to listen to anyone, I'm going to do it myself. It's like, go ahead, but we'll see if that's going to, the speed, if you're going to get the results
You
that you
got
want.
you got 5,000 lectures from Omram, and sometimes, I'll read the start of the chapter. Oh, it's probably going to be about this. Then it just hits you with so many factors that have escaped your senses. You would never have found them relevant. But after you're brought into that, initiated into that awareness, you're like, oh shit, no, for sure. I can see how this all comes into play. So it's like you want to play a guessing game. Someone had to get there. When you're talking about ancient India, and someone had to take like they had to crawl so we could walk to run. So of course that's like a valid system of like, okay, I'm gonna try to figure it out. But yeah, like if you want to rely on your own curiosity and imagination, it's a hard thing.
It's a balance though too, and I want to touch a little bit more with why I think people can get jaded by how the material sciences are taught. Like so much of the way in which science is taught is radically anti anything spiritual. Radically, we could call it the establishment of scientism, the religious. It's like fundamentalism that we've seen in the religious traditions is the same exact kind of fundamentalist point of view with scientific. Jung actually talked about it in his papers on the development of consciousness, and he talks about these different stages, and he talks about how he's concerned that most people when they transition, that humanity's transition from the stage 3, which is like the religious, magical thinking, seeing things very black and white in terms of morality. A lot of modern day Christians would fit into stage 3, we could say, and then he says stage 4 is when you become hyper rational and start to essentially become more atheistic, doubt any kind of, and then in that instance, unconsciously, your ego becomes your own God. And he was very, very concerned about that, where he talks about what he was concerned with was stage 5, which was looking at things through a symbolic lens. He described it as becoming sophisticated primitives. So the same way in which so-called primitives would have shamans, would follow their life according to dreams and things of that nature. He emphasized the importance of, developing a sophisticated, the same way the European has a sophisticated intellect, but a neglected heart, like combining that with the sophisticated or the depth, the emotional depth. So I think it's like, you don't have to throw out the intellect. I think a lot of people think when they go into these intellectual realms, there's always, we have the scientific mind as Westerners. We're always asking ourselves, well, how the fuck do you know that? Like, how is that actually true? We're always asking that. And that's great because that ethos already keeps us grounded. I think it's a matter of balancing. There's sometimes when we have to let go of that and listen. I think there's no better place to let go and listen when you're listening to a master, someone advanced. But at the end of the day, it always comes down to application in your own life. That's why the principle of self-verification to me solves that riddle of how do you know what you know? Well, have you experienced it yourself yet? That's one way to solve that whole riddle.
And the root word of verification is actually Virgo. That ain't a cat. That's for real.
No cap.
And maybe it might not be real, but
I think it's Veritas.
I think so much of this whole subject is explained if you start to meditate on the Pisces and Virgo axis. And again, Pisces is idealism. Pisces is the most quote unquote spiritual. Pisces, for try to stay with me here, has no boundary, where God and man and everything in between are one. Well, in other dimensions, there's somewhat of a separation between entities. I'm not you, you're not me. On one level, on a spiritual level, yeah. But on a 3D level, obviously we're different entities. So Pisces has this like hyper idealism, sees the spiritual truth of things, but does that necessarily translate to the 3D? Again, I just love watching MMA, and it's like how many dudes felt from the start that they were meant to be the champion.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone feels that way. Like literally 99% of the athletes feel that way. But then on the Virgo side, there's methodology, there's cause and effect, there's severity of consequences. So if you don't want those consequences, don't make those choices that curate those conditions that manifest those consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So Virgo is just this thorough sign. And then on Pisces, it's hyper idealistic. And you need both of them, the idealism and the spiritual connection to our brothers, to our sisters, to all things, living in a level of super consciousness so we don't get wrapped up in the Maya. But at the same time, I love this quote: the illusion exists to serve you. You don't exist to serve the illusion, knowing that, like, okay, I'm here in 3D matter and God wants a certain level of mastery. That's why I'm here. You could be outside of a body, you could be in another dimension, who knows, you could be unanimated, some non-existent soul, but here we are in a body. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like enjoying the sacredness to it. And then the irony that so many spiritual people I feel are missing is that the more you develop this healthy amount of logic, not that logic takes over your whole personality, but that will translate to your spiritual growth and
Yeah,
development.
absolutely. I think the last thing I'd like to add on the subject, I was speaking to before, the whole archetype of the conspiracy theorist who's just in like terrible health and not managing their body. I think there's a misconception. It was actually in the daily meditation today from Omram. Um, that when you awaken to the reality and value of spiritual work, that there's like a tendency to regard the matter as being imprisoned in matter. Like, I'm trapped in this body, and if only I can minimize its influence on me, then I can just focus exclusively on my spiritual work and advance. Um, And a counter perspective I'd like to offer to that is that the our matter is an instrument, a tool to do our spiritual work on earth. And the same way in which we have a house in which we live, if it's not properly maintained, you have all these odorous elements or odorous smells, and it starts to attract different kinds of pests, and it's unorganized and all over the place. Our body is the same way. It requires maintenance. And when it's left cleanly, you attract beautiful company into the vehicle, so to speak. So I mention all of this because an essential element at the end of the day is also finding those practices for you on a just concrete physical level that keep your body in great health. And when you're in that great physical health, it translates to the astral, having that hygiene emotionally translates to the mental clarity, the purity. And I think when you do all of that with the intent of having the idealism of wanting to make a significant impact within your lifetime and still maintaining that logical, scientific, explorative, but like, how do I actually know that ethos? I mean, the combination of all of that, they're destined to do beautiful, incredible things. And, I think these perspectives we're hoping will inspire many brothers and sisters alike to stay on this path of self mastery and bring incredible works, fruits of their labor upon this earth.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to end with just my final insight is there's respective planes that we live in, and the esoteric interest is attracting us to those planes, mental body, astral body, spiritual planes. And again, a lot of people feel okay, they're not getting addressed in their schooling system, in their upbringing. Not even religion is addressing these concepts, at least clearly. And so there is a logic to employ, there is a realism, there is a mastery to employ with the mental plane. Like it's not unrealistic to know that controlling your thoughts affects your vibration. Your vibration is affecting to a degree what's manifesting in your life. That's not illogical. But what is illogical, what is non mastery, is just getting lost in not addressing each respective plane with the attention and the care that it deserves.
Hmm.
And then the next thing I want to share is again, learning how to normalize both of these sides of Virgo and Pisces, learning how to normalize esotericism weaved into your life, but also normalizing reason and logic and practicality, and knowing valleys, summits, practicality, idealism. There's certain times that you should be incorporating both through the day. There should be a time meditating every day where you go into a transcendental space, but then there should also be a lot of focus on these other things, on practicality. So there's times of the month that you want a 3-day break. There's times of the year you want a week break. There's times of the day you want an hour break, and then you're back to it, but not necessarily getting caught. And again, one of the shadow sides of Pisces, if we're going to talk about that, is escapism and wanting to return to the void.
Yeah.
Like I don't like this world. Let me disassociate and cope. And again, we don't ever want to feel stupid. So when we get into escapism, we validate it with, self-righteousness. Well,
That rationalize it.
so much better than this world. They're all so evil. So not letting that ego determine what's good, because it's like, there's levels and levels and levels of you. Why stay here? Why is that lower level you telling you what's up, dictating your choices? Break free from that and climb the ranks to the higher self.
Amen. I think we'll, cut it on that note.
Yeah, and I also want to say that it's been a fun first season.
Oh yeah. Season 1,
That's
episode
crazy.
9. That's wild.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
From the vortex of Sedona. Farewell.
Farewell, beings. Salute.